The cocktail hit him square in the chest. Red liquid splashed across his suit jacket. Ice cubes bounced off the floor. The entire bar went silent. For one long second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Then the woman laughed. A sharp laugh. The kind that usually encouraged other people to join in. And they did. Several of her co-workers burst into laughter. Someone nearly spilled their own drink. A few people pulled out their phones. Interesting. Very interesting. The black man standing in the middle of the luxury hotel bar looked down at his soaked jacket, then at the melting ice sliding toward his shoes, then back at the woman. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't threaten anyone. Instead, he calmly picked an ice cube off his sleeve and dropped it into an empty glass sitting nearby. The room grew quieter, because that wasn't the reaction anyone expected, especially not the woman who had thrown the drink. Olivia Grant folded her arms, still smiling, still convinced she was the smartest person in the room. Got something to say now? Several co-workers laughed again. The black man stared at her for a moment. Not angry, not embarrassed, just thoughtful. Then he spoke. One sentence. Quiet, measured, deadly calm. You just cost your company $100 million. Silence. Complete silence. The laughter disappeared instantly. Olivia blinked, then laughed again, louder this time, because surely that was a joke. It had to be. $100 million? From a man sitting alone at a bar? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The room relaxed. The tension broke. People started laughing again. More confidently now. More aggressively. The moment felt settled. Finished. Only one person wasn't laughing. Marcus Bennett. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Marcus wasn't joking. Not even a little. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, wiped the front of his suit jacket, then calmly placed the cloth back into his pocket. No drama. No performance. No attempt to impress anyone. The simplicity somehow made the scene more uncomfortable, at least for a few people paying attention. One of them was a young bartender named Eric. 24 years old. Observant. Quiet. The kind of person who noticed details other people ignored. Eric had watched the entire situation unfold from behind the counter. And something about Marcus felt different. Not rich. Not powerful. Different. The confidence. The calmness. The complete lack of concern. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people who got humiliated in public either exploded or collapsed. Marcus didn't either. It was almost as if the drink didn't matter. Almost as if Olivia wasn't the important part of the story. Meanwhile, Olivia was enjoying herself. Far too much. The sales executive turned toward her coworkers, holding her drink high. Can you believe this guy? More laughter. More attention. More spectators. The group occupied nearly half the lounge area. Around 15 people total. Employees from Stratford Dynamics, a rapidly growing technology consulting firm. They were celebrating a major quarter. Big bonuses. Big contracts. Big ambitions. At least that was the reason they gave. The alcohol had become the real event hours ago. Marcus glanced toward the hotel's grand windows. The city lights reflected against the glass. Beautiful view. Expensive view. The kind of place where important business conversations happened every night. That was why he was there. Not for a drink. Not for the atmosphere. For a meeting. A very important meeting. One that had been scheduled months earlier. One worth considerably more than $100 million. Funny how quickly things changed. Marcus checked his watch. 7:42 p.m. His guest would arrive soon. Very soon. Unfortunately, Olivia wasn't finished. Not even close. The sales executive stepped closer, still carrying the confidence that comes from never facing consequences. You know? She glanced at his stained jacket, then smirked. You should probably leave. Several co-workers chuckled. Marcus looked at her. Why? The question seemed to surprise her. Probably because he asked it calmly. Not defensively. Not emotionally. Just honestly. Olivia gestured toward the bar. Toward the polished wood. The expensive lighting. The executives sitting nearby. The luxury surrounding them. This isn't exactly your crowd. There it was. The assumption. The real reason behind everything. Interesting. Very interesting. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Even some of Olivia's co-workers seemed to realize she'd gone too far. But nobody stopped her. Nobody ever stops arrogance while it's winning. Marcus nodded slowly, as though considering her point. Then he smiled. A small smile. The kind that confused people. Especially people expecting anger. I see. That was all he said. 3 words. No argument. No defense. No explanation. Olivia looked disappointed. Apparently, she wanted a fight. Marcus wasn't interested. The black businessman reached for the check resting beside his untouched drink. The bartender immediately shook his head. It's already taken care of, sir. Marcus looked surprised. Eric smiled nervously. The gentleman you're meeting called ahead. Interesting. Very interesting. Marcus nodded politely. Thank you. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and prepared to leave the lounge area. Several people laughed again, believing they had won, believing they had embarrassed a stranger, believing the story was over. They couldn't have been more wrong, because at that exact moment, the hotel's front entrance opened, and the man Olivia's company had spent 18 months trying to impress had just arrived. The man who entered through the hotel's front doors didn't look around. He didn't need to. His eyes immediately found Marcus Bennett. Interesting. Very interesting. The recognition was instant. Not the kind people give acquaintances. The kind people give decision-makers. The kind people give individuals whose time matters. A lot. The newcomer adjusted his tie, then started walking directly toward Marcus. Several people in the lounge noticed, including Olivia. At first, she assumed the man worked for the hotel. Maybe a manager. Maybe security. Maybe someone responding to the disturbance. That assumption lasted less than 10 seconds. Because the moment the man reached Marcus, he extended his hand. With both respect and urgency. Marcus. Marcus smiled. A genuine smile this time. David. The 2 men shook hands. Not casually. Professionally. Like people who had known each other for years. Like equals. Interesting. Very interesting. Olivia's smile faded slightly. Just slightly. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared. Only a little. But enough. Meanwhile, Marcus glanced at his stained jacket. Then laughed softly. David followed his gaze, immediately noticing the red cocktail stain running down the front of the suit. The smile disappeared from his face. What happened? Marcus shrugged. The simplest shrug imaginable. Long story. David looked around the lounge, studying the expressions, the phones, the spectators, the nervous bartender, then finally Olivia and her co-workers. He didn't need much imagination. The room practically explained itself. Interesting. Very interesting. Because David wasn't just anyone. David Keller was Chief Strategy Officer of Titan Equity Partners, one of the largest investment firms in the country. And tonight's meeting wasn't a social event. Not even close. It was the final discussion before a partnership announcement. A partnership worth over $100 million. Marcus had personally approved the meeting months earlier. After 18 months of negotiations. 18 months. Funny how fragile 18 months could be. David lowered his voice. You okay? Marcus nodded. I'm fine. And he was. At least emotionally. The stain could be cleaned. The suit could be replaced. The moment wasn't what bothered him. The reason behind it was. Very different problem. Across the room, Olivia folded her arms, trying to recover confidence, trying to convince herself none of this mattered. The problem was that several co-workers no longer looked convinced, especially one of them, Ryan Mercer, Vice President of Business Development, 37 years old, sharp, ambitious, usually the smartest person at the table. And right now Ryan felt something uncomfortable, a feeling growing in his stomach, a feeling he couldn't explain. Interesting. Very interesting. Because he recognized David Keller. Not personally. Professionally. Every executive in their industry recognized David Keller. The man appeared regularly in financial publications, conference panels, industry interviews. Ryan had seen him dozens of times, which created a very troubling question. Why was Titan Equity's Chief Strategy Officer meeting privately with a stranger they had just humiliated? The answer couldn't be good. Not good at all. Ryan quietly pulled out his phone, opened a search engine, then typed 2 words. Marcus Bennett. At first nothing happened. Then the results loaded, and the color drained from his face. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the first image wasn't merely familiar. It was devastating. A business magazine cover. Marcus Bennett, founder and CEO. Bennett Capital. Ryan stared, then stared harder. No. No way. His thumb moved across the screen. Another article. Another interview. Another profile. Each one worse than the last. Because every result confirmed the same thing. The man Olivia had publicly humiliated wasn't some random guest. He wasn't an outsider. He wasn't someone who didn't belong. He was one of the most influential investors in the entire technology sector. Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken. Fast. Very fast. A coworker noticed. "You okay?" Ryan didn't answer. Couldn't. He was too busy reading. Bennett Capital. Multi-billion-dollar portfolio. Major acquisitions. Strategic investments. Industry influence. The numbers became ridiculous after a while. The kind of numbers people stop understanding. Interesting. Very interesting. Then Ryan found something even worse. Much worse. A press release. Dated 3 weeks earlier. Titan Equity Partners. Bennett Capital. Strategic partnership discussions. Expected value, $100 million. Ryan froze. Completely froze. Because suddenly Marcus's sentence made perfect sense. Painfully perfect sense. You just cost your company $100 million. He hadn't been bluffing. Not even a little. The realization hit, like a truck. Across the lounge, Olivia was still smiling. Still joking. Still completely unaware. Ryan looked at her. Then at Marcus. Then back at the article. His stomach twisted. The room suddenly felt warmer. Much warmer. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Ryan understood something nobody else did. Not yet. The disaster hadn't happened when Olivia threw the drink. The disaster was happening right now, minute by minute, second by second, and nobody could stop it. David and Marcus exchanged a few final words, then started walking toward a private conference area near the back of the hotel, the place where the meeting had originally been scheduled. Several executives stepped aside to let them pass. Instinctively, respectfully, Marcus never looked at Olivia. Not once. That somehow felt worse. Much worse. As if she no longer mattered. As if the decision had already been made. Ryan suddenly stood. Fast enough to draw attention. Olivia frowned. "What are you doing?" Ryan looked at her. For a moment, he couldn't find the words. Because how exactly do you explain that a single arrogant decision may have just destroyed 18 months of work? Finally he managed. "Olivia." A pause. A long pause. The kind that makes people nervous. Very nervous. "What?" Ryan swallowed hard. Then turned his phone toward her. Showing the screen. Showing the face. Showing the name. Marcus Bennett. Olivia looked down. Her smile vanished. Instantly. The room seemed to tilt. Just slightly. Enough. Because for the first time that night, she realized the man she threw a drink at wasn't who she thought he was. Not even close. Olivia stared at the phone. Then stared harder. As if looking long enough might somehow change what she was seeing. It didn't. Interesting. Very interesting. The face on the screen was unmistakable. The same face. The same calm expression. The same man sitting alone at the bar only minutes earlier. Marcus Bennett. Founder. CEO. Investor. Industry leader. The articles kept appearing. One after another. Business magazines. Financial networks. Conference headlines. Forbes. Bloomberg. Market reports. Every result made the situation worse. Much worse. The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. Harder to breathe. Across the lounge, the laughter had completely disappeared. Nobody was celebrating anymore. Nobody was drinking anymore. Nobody seemed interested in the bonus party that had felt so important an hour earlier. Funny how quickly priorities changed. Very quickly. Ryan Mercer took the phone back. His hands were shaking. Only slightly. But enough. Because Ryan understood exactly what was at stake. More than anyone else in the room. The vice president of business development had spent nearly 2 years helping negotiate the partnership. Countless meetings. Countless presentations. Countless flights. Countless late-night conference calls. 18 months. Interesting. Very interesting. 18 months of work. Destroyed in less than 30 seconds. Olivia looked up, still struggling to process reality. "You're saying?" Her voice cracked. Then she tried again. "You're saying that's him?" Ryan laughed. A short laugh. The kind people make when they're too stressed to react normally. "Yes." Silence. A long silence. The kind that forces people to think. For the first time that evening, Olivia began replaying the last 20 minutes in her head. Every comment. Every joke. Every smirk. Every assumption. The drink. Especially the drink. The memory suddenly felt much different. Much heavier. Interesting. Very interesting. Because moments always look different after consequences arrive. A coworker leaned closer. "Maybe it won't matter." Nobody responded. Not even the person who said it. Because nobody actually believed it. Across the room, Marcus and David Keller disappeared through a set of private conference doors. The doors closed behind them. Softly, quietly. Yet somehow the sound felt final. Very final. Ryan checked his watch, then checked it again, as though time itself had become important. Because it had. Every minute mattered now. Every minute Marcus spent in that room increased the likelihood that decisions were being made. Permanent decisions. Expensive decisions. The kind nobody could reverse later. Interesting. Very interesting. Olivia stood. Immediately. The movement surprised everyone, including herself. I need to talk to him. Ryan shook his head. No. What do you mean no? I mean no. His voice was firmer now. More direct. The way executives sounded when situations became serious. You've already done enough. The words landed hard. Harder than Olivia expected. Because deep down she knew he was right. The truth hurt. Especially when it arrived late. Meanwhile, inside the private conference suite, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Quiet. Professional. Focused. Marcus sat at the far end of a polished conference table. David sat across from him. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The room smelled faintly of coffee and expensive wood. A place designed for important decisions. And tonight's decision suddenly felt more important than ever. Interesting. Very interesting. David slid a folder across the table, then paused. Because despite everything, one question still bothered him. A lot. What actually happened out there? Marcus glanced toward the stain on his jacket, then smiled faintly. Not because it was funny. Because it wasn't. I got a lesson. David frowned. A lesson? Marcus nodded. A reminder. The investor leaned back slightly. For several moments he said nothing, then finally added. People tell you exactly who they are when they think there won't be consequences. The words lingered. Heavy. Meaningful. David understood immediately. And unfortunately, he agreed. Very much agreed. Because Titan Equity wasn't merely evaluating numbers anymore. Numbers were easy. Financials were easy. Revenue was easy. Character wasn't. Character revealed itself in moments like this. Moments nobody planned for. Interesting. Very interesting. Back in the lounge, panic was spreading. Slowly. Then all at once. Phones came out. Calls were made. Messages were sent. Executives who weren't even present started receiving texts. The chain reaction had begun. One senior manager answered his phone, listened, then turned pale. What? Several co-workers looked up. The manager stood. Who told him? A pause. Another pause. Then, no, we're handling it. The call ended. Nobody liked the look on his face. Not one bit. Olivia felt her stomach tighten. What happened? The manager looked at her. For a moment he seemed unsure whether to answer. Then reality won. The CEO knows. Silence. Complete silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Stratford Dynamics wasn't a small company, their CEO rarely involved himself in individual incidents, especially social incidents. Yet somehow he already knew. That alone told everyone how serious this had become. Olivia sat back down. Slowly. Almost mechanically. The confidence from earlier was completely gone now. Vanished. Replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear. Real fear. The kind that appears when actions finally catch up to assumptions. Ryan's phone vibrated. He looked down. Read the message. Then closed his eyes. Just for a second. A very long second. What is it? Someone asked. Ryan swallowed. Hard. Then answered. The CEO is on his way. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because everyone understood what that meant. Very interesting. Very dangerous. Very expensive. And somewhere behind the closed conference room doors, Marcus Bennett was preparing to make a decision. A decision worth $100 million. A decision nobody in the lounge could influence anymore. Not Olivia. Not Ryan. Not even the CEO rushing across the city. Because for the first time since the cocktail hit his suit, Marcus wasn't deciding whether to forgive an insult. He was deciding whether he could trust the company behind it. The CEO arrived 23 minutes later. No police escort. No assistants. No entourage. Just one black sedan pulling aggressively into the hotel's private entrance. Interesting. Very interesting. The moment Richard Holloway stepped into the lounge, everyone stood up. Instinctively. Immediately. Not because they were told to. Because people recognized authority when it entered a room. And right now authority looked furious. Absolutely furious. Richard Holloway wasn't known for emotional reactions. The 60-year-old CEO had spent 3 decades building Stratford Dynamics from a regional consulting company into a national powerhouse. Investors trusted him. Clients respected him. Competitors feared him. But tonight he looked like a man watching 18 months of work burn in real time. His eyes scanned the room. Olivia, Ryan, the managers, the employees, the half-empty glasses, the uncomfortable faces. The atmosphere told him everything. Interesting. Very interesting. Nobody was celebrating anymore. Nobody even pretended to. Richard stopped in front of Ryan. What happened? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Ryan took a breath, then explained. The comments, the assumptions, the drink, the public humiliation. Every word seemed to make the CEO's expression darker. Not because he was hearing new information, because he was hearing confirmation. The worst kind. When Ryan finally finished, silence followed. Long silence. The kind that made people nervous. Very nervous. Richard looked toward Olivia, the woman who only an hour earlier had been the loudest person in the room. Now she couldn't even meet his eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. Tell me he's exaggerating. Olivia swallowed hard, then slowly shook her head. The CEO closed his eyes. Just for a second. A very long second. When he opened them again, disappointment had replaced anger. That somehow felt worse. Much worse. Because anger passes. Disappointment stays. What were you thinking? Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it. Because there wasn't a good answer. Not one that sounded reasonable. Not one that sounded professional. Not one that sounded intelligent. The truth was embarrassingly simple. She had made an assumption, and then another, and another, until assumption became action, and action became consequence. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard looked away, toward the private conference wing, the closed doors, the room where Marcus Bennett was sitting, making decisions, important decisions, expensive decisions. The CEO felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Helplessness. Real helplessness. Because money couldn't solve this. Influence couldn't solve this. Titles couldn't solve this. Character problems rarely respond to negotiation. Meanwhile, inside the conference suite, Marcus sat quietly reviewing documents. David Keller watched him carefully. The two men had discussed numbers for nearly 40 minutes. Revenue projections, growth strategies, market opportunities, all important topics. Yet neither man could ignore the obvious. The atmosphere had changed. Interesting. Very interesting. Finally, David spoke. The CEO is here. Marcus wasn't surprised. Figured. David smiled faintly. Want to see him? Marcus looked toward the city skyline outside the windows. Thousands of lights. Thousands of stories. Thousands of choices. Then he answered. Eventually. Not yes. Not no. Just eventually. David understood immediately. The answer meant something. Something important. Because Marcus wasn't avoiding Richard Holloway. He was evaluating him. The distinction mattered. A lot. Back in the lounge, Richard had already begun making calls. Legal counsel. Communications. Senior leadership. Nobody liked the situation. Nobody liked the odds. One executive finally voiced what everyone was thinking. Can we save the deal? Interesting. Very interesting. The room fell silent. Because that question sat at the center of everything. Richard thought carefully before answering. Then surprised everyone. I don't know. Nobody expected that. CEOs are supposed to project certainty, confidence, control, not uncertainty. Yet honesty seemed more appropriate. Because for the first time in this entire process, the decision belonged entirely to someone else. And that someone else had every reason to walk away. Olivia stared at the floor, listening. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. The reality was becoming impossible to avoid. This wasn't merely about her. Not anymore. The consequences had spread. To the company. To her coworkers. To everyone connected to the deal. Interesting. Very interesting. For the first time that evening, embarrassment transformed into guilt. A much heavier burden. Hours passed. Slowly. Painfully. The lounge emptied. Employees left. Managers left. Only a handful remained. Waiting. Watching. Hoping. The hotel staff moved quietly around them. Cleaning tables. Collecting glasses. Resetting chairs. The ordinary rhythm of the evening continued. Yet nothing felt ordinary. Shortly before midnight, a hotel employee approached Richard. Mr. Holloway? The CEO looked up. Yes. The employee handed him a small card. A message from Mr. Bennett. Silence. Instant silence. Every person still in the lounge froze. Richard took the card. Turned it over. Read the handwritten note. Then read it again. Interesting. Very interesting. Ryan stood. What does it say? The CEO didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared toward the conference wing. Thinking. Really thinking. Finally, he spoke. He's willing to meet. A collective breath filled the room. Hope. Small hope. Fragile hope. But hope nonetheless. Then Richard continued. And the hope immediately weakened. He specifically requested that no attorneys attend. A pause. No public relations team. Another pause. No negotiation team. Ryan frowned. What does he want? Richard looked down at the note one final time, then answered quietly. The words seemed almost unbelievable. He wants a conversation. Silence returned. Because suddenly everyone understood. This wasn't about contracts anymore. It wasn't about numbers. It wasn't about leverage. Marcus Bennett already had all the leverage. The meeting tomorrow would be about something far more difficult. Trust. And trust, once broken, is far more expensive than $100 million. The next morning arrived too quickly, at least for Stratford Dynamics. Interesting. Very interesting. Almost nobody slept. Not Richard Holloway. Not Ryan Mercer. And certainly not Olivia Grant. The woman who had once been the loudest person in the room now sat alone in her apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying the same moment. Again, and again, and again. The cocktail. The laughter. The sentence. You just cost your company $100 million. At the time it had sounded ridiculous. Now it sounded terrifying. By 8 o'clock that morning, Richard Holloway was already seated inside a private conference room at Bennett Capital's headquarters. Not the hotel. Not neutral ground. Marcus's building. Marcus's environment. Marcus's rules. The distinction mattered. A lot. Interesting. Very interesting. The conference room itself was surprisingly modest. No giant displays. No luxury artwork. No flashy trophies. Just a long table. Large windows. Clean lines. Quiet confidence. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Richard noticed immediately. Power often looked different when it was real. 5 minutes later, Marcus entered the room. No assistants. No security. No entourage. Just Marcus. Carrying a cup of coffee. Wearing a different suit. The stain from the night before completely gone. Unfortunately for Stratford Dynamics, the memory wasn't. Marcus greeted Richard. Politely. Then sat down. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The silence wasn't hostile. Just honest. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard finally broke it. Thank you for meeting with me. Marcus nodded. Of course. Simple. Professional. Nothing more. The CEO leaned forward slightly. Prepared. Careful. The way people become when every word matters. I want to apologize. Marcus listened. Richard continued. What happened yesterday was unacceptable. True. What Olivia did was wrong. Also true. It doesn't represent who we are. Marcus remained silent. Still listening. Still evaluating. Richard noticed. And suddenly realized something uncomfortable. The apology wasn't the hard part. The hard part was convincing Marcus it was true. Very different challenge. Interesting. Very interesting. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus asked a question. A simple question. The kind that sounds harmless. Until it isn't. What makes you believe it doesn't represent your company? Richard blinked. The CEO hadn't expected that. Not immediately. Not first. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people would have discussed money. Contracts. Compensation. Damage control. Marcus went somewhere else entirely. Richard considered his answer. Carefully. Then responded. Because that's not how we train people. Marcus nodded slowly. Then asked another question. What happened after she threw the drink? The CEO frowned slightly. What do you mean? Marcus folded his hands. How many people stopped her? Silence. Complete silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard already knew the answer. Nobody. Not one person. The realization settled heavily between them. Marcus wasn't judging Olivia anymore. He was examining the environment around her. The culture. The reactions. The silence. The choices. The things organizations often overlook. Richard leaned back. Slowly. Because for the first time he fully understood where this conversation was heading. And it wasn't toward a contract. Not yet. Marcus spoke again. Calmly. The same calm that had unsettled everyone from the beginning. The drink wasn't the problem. There it was. The sentence. The one Richard would remember long after. This meeting ended. The drink wasn't the problem. Marcus looked out the window briefly. Then continued. The problem was how comfortable everyone seemed. Interesting. Very interesting. The words landed hard. Because they were true. Painfully true. Nobody had stopped Olivia. Nobody had challenged her. Nobody had defended a stranger. Most had laughed. Others had watched. A few recorded it. But almost nobody intervened. Marcus wasn't describing one employee. He was describing a room. Richard lowered his eyes. The CEO suddenly felt older than he had the day before. Much older. Because leadership becomes uncomfortable when the mirror starts working. Marcus took a sip of coffee, then continued. If someone can humiliate a stranger in public and everyone treats it like entertainment. A pause. What happens when the stakes are higher? The room fell silent again. Neither man rushed to fill it. Interesting. Very interesting. Because some questions answer themselves. Richard finally spoke. Quietly. We failed. Marcus looked at him. The CEO continued. We failed that test. No excuses. No legal language. No corporate spin. Just honesty. For the first time all morning, Marcus seemed slightly less guarded. Only slightly. But enough. Meanwhile, several floors below, Olivia sat alone in a waiting area. Richard had insisted she attend. Not the meeting itself. The waiting. The consequences. The uncertainty. Interesting. Very interesting. She stared through the glass wall overlooking the city. Employees moved through the building. Meetings happened. Phones rang. Life continued. Yet her own future felt suspended. Frozen. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about promotions. Or bonuses. Or sales targets. She was thinking about character. A strange thing to think about after losing control of everything else. Back upstairs, Marcus and Richard continued talking. For nearly 2 hours. Not about money. Not about numbers. Not about valuation. Trust. Culture. Leadership. Responsibility. The subjects that rarely appear in press releases. Yet determine everything. Eventually, the conversation reached its unavoidable destination. The partnership. The deal. The $100 million. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard sat quietly. Waiting. Marcus looked toward the skyline one final time. Then back at the CEO. The decision had already been made. Richard could see it. The only question was what that decision would be. Marcus opened a folder. Closed it. Then finally spoke. And the words that followed would change everything. Marcus looked at the folder. Then closed it. Slowly. Deliberately. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard Holloway watched without speaking. The CEO already understood something important. The decision had been made long before this meeting started. Probably long before he entered the building. Maybe even the moment the cocktail hit Marcus's suit. The only thing left was hearing it. Finally, Marcus spoke. Calmly. The same way he had spoken all along. The partnership won't move forward. Silence. Complete silence. Richard didn't react immediately. Not because he was surprised. Because he wasn't. Deep down, he'd known. Interesting. Very interesting. Still, hearing the words felt different. Final. Permanent. Expensive. $100 million. Gone. Not because of market conditions. Not because of competition. Not because of legal issues. Because of choices. Human choices. Marcus folded his hands. The drink didn't cost your company this deal. Richard looked up, listening carefully. Marcus continued. The culture behind it did. The words landed heavily. Heavily because they were true. Nobody had stopped Olivia. Nobody had stepped in. Nobody had looked at a stranger being humiliated and said, "That's enough." Interesting. Very interesting. Marcus stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched beneath him. Thousands of people. Thousands of businesses. Thousands of opportunities. I invest in people. A pause. Not spreadsheets. Richard nodded slowly. Because he understood. Perhaps for the first time completely. Marcus wasn't rejecting Stratford Dynamics because of a mistake. Every company makes mistakes. Every person makes mistakes. He was rejecting what the mistake revealed. Very different thing. The CEO took a deep breath. Then surprised Marcus. I agree. Marcus turned slightly. Richard continued. If I were in your position. A pause. I wouldn't sign either. The honesty hung in the room. Interesting. Very interesting. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then Marcus nodded. Not because the deal had changed. Because respect had. And sometimes respect survives where business doesn't. Eventually the meeting ended. No shouting. No threats. No negotiations. Just two leaders acknowledging reality. When Richard left the conference room, he looked older. Not defeated. Just reflective. The elevator ride down felt unusually quiet. As if his mind was still upstairs. still replaying every word, every lesson, every failure. When the elevator doors opened, Olivia immediately stood. Hope flashed across her face. Small hope, fragile hope, dangerous hope. Richard saw it, and his expression told her everything. Before he said a single word, the deal was gone. Interesting. Very interesting. Olivia slowly sat back down. The reality hit harder than she expected. Not because of the money, not because of the headlines, because for the first time she fully understood what she'd done. The CEO sat beside her. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Olivia asked, "Did he hate me?" Richard looked at her, then shook his head. No. The answer surprised her. A lot. Because she would have understood hate. She deserved hate. At least that's what she thought. But Marcus Bennett had never seemed angry. Never yelled. Never humiliated her back. Never tried to destroy her. Interesting. Very interesting. What did he say about me? Richard stared through the glass, watching employees move through the lobby. He barely talked about you. That hurt even more. Because suddenly Olivia understood. Marcus hadn't been judging her. He'd been judging the environment that allowed her behavior. The culture. The silence. The people who watched. The people who laughed. The people who did nothing. For the first time in her professional life, Olivia felt truly ashamed. Not embarrassed. Ashamed. Very different emotion. A week later, Stratford Dynamics announced internal reforms. Mandatory leadership training. Bias education. Professional conduct reviews. New accountability policies. Not because of public pressure. Because Richard Holloway refused to waste the lesson. Interesting. Very interesting. 3 months later, Olivia's employment ended. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Not vindicatively. Professionally. Quietly. The consequences finally arrived. And for the first time in her life, she accepted them. A year passed. Then another. Life moved forward. As it always does. Olivia eventually found work with a nonprofit organization focused on youth mentorship. The salary was smaller. The office was smaller. Everything was smaller. Except the impact. Funny how life works sometimes. Interesting. Very interesting. One Saturday afternoon, the organization hosted a community fundraising event. Families filled the park. Children ran between booths. Volunteers carried boxes. Music played softly in the background. Olivia was helping organize donations when she froze. Completely froze. Because standing near one of the tents was Marcus Bennett. Older. Calmer. Exactly as she remembered. For a moment she considered walking away, pretending she hadn't seen him. Then she remembered the person she used to be, and the person she was trying to become. Very different people. Olivia took a deep breath, then walked over. Marcus recognized her immediately. Of course he did. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "I'm sorry." No excuses. No explanations. No defenses. Just 3 words. Simple words. Honest words. Interesting. Very interesting. Marcus studied her for a moment, then smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. "I know." Olivia blinked. "You do?" Marcus nodded. "You showed up." A strange answer. Yet somehow the perfect one. Because apologies matter. But change matters more. For several minutes they talked. Not about the deal. Not about the bar. Not about the money. About the students. The nonprofit. The future. Normal things. Human things. When the conversation ended, Olivia felt lighter. Not forgiven. Changed. Very different thing. Later that afternoon, a high school student approached Marcus after a speech. The teenager looked nervous. Curious. Thoughtful. "Were you angry when she threw the drink on you?" "Interesting. Very interesting." Marcus laughed softly. "A little." The student smiled. "Then why didn't you get even?" Marcus looked across the park. Children laughing. Families talking. Volunteers helping strangers. Then he answered. The same way he answered most important questions. Simply. Because teaching someone a lesson is more powerful than destroying them. The student nodded slowly, as if storing the words away for later. Maybe he was. Marcus watched the crowd for another moment, then smiled. A quiet smile. The kind people earn. Olivia thought she was humiliating a stranger. She had no idea she was revealing something much bigger. Not Marcus's identity. Her company's character. And in the end, the $100 million wasn't lost because of a drink. It was lost because respect disappeared before the contract was signed.